Great. Well, welcome everybody to the Moving Forward podcast, where we talk about the future with those who had invested in the Anthology products. I'm Andy Smith, president of Deerbrook Consulting, and with me today again is my good friend Greg Theisen. Greg, thanks for coming on board today so we can talk a little bit about more specifics. You know, in the past, we've talked in some of these podcasts, I think, been generally like, what's going to happen with Anthology? What happens if you're in there? What do you need to think about? And we know a bit more today than we have in the past about the future. But we're also here to talk about some of the more specifics because there's some different cases that people need to address, unique circumstances they find themselves in. And so today we're going to focus on the way forward if you're on-prem. If you were one of the old legacy Anthology products, former campus management product, you have it on-prem, what's your future look like? So that's our focus today. Greg, like I said, welcome. Just in case folks don't know about you, maybe you can tell them a little bit real quick.
Yeah, so Greg Theisen was the VP of Cloud Services at Anthology. So I managed that team for across their entire product suite. Also, the integrations team, the team that was developing integrations between their 60 or so products, and then the Illuminate team, which was the data warehouse solution that spanned all of their products. A former Anthology customer, like many of you on the call. I was the CIO at Post University in Waterbury, Connecticut. Had implemented a wide suite of Anthology products. Was referenced to Ande at one point, so that's how we got to know each other. So a lot of experience on both sides of the equation, both from having to navigate Anthology as a customer, as well as trying to remediate and address some of the issues that bothered me as a customer once I went to work there. So
came full circle there, Greg. Yeah, great to have you today. So just we'll update this in case it's the first one someone saw. So coming out of a Lucian Live, what we learned is the Anthology cloud platform, often spoken of as Cloud 2, the more advanced of the two, the true SaaS implementation. Lucian looked at it, and in the same way they looked at their cloud colleague in Banner and said, hey, we're going to integrate this into our Lucian Student, not to be confused with Anthology Student, but the Lucian Student platform. And so if you're in that Cloud 2 or the SaaS version of Anthology, it's your way forward. And so that was great news, I think, Greg, from the people I've talked to, customers we have. People are like, hey, you know, we were scared. We may have made a dead-ended investment, but now we have a new path forward. So folks that are in that camp are in a place where they can continue to get the value and the ROI on the investments they've made in Anthology Student and still have a path forward. That's what I'm hearing when I talk to folks.
Yeah, that was extremely positive news. I think, I think the fear before, eLive was the uncertainty of no path. And on some of our previous podcasts, we talked about that, really trying to get clarity. And Anthology has four modalities. Now Lucian for Anthology Student, which is the on-prem, a hosted environment, kind of legacy, a Cloud 1, which is an IaaS kind of environment, and then the Cloud 2, which is really the goal where everybody. So we were laying out plans when I was there, and they've already begun the migration of the hosted customers into the cloud, even though it's cloud, it's hosted, but into the SaaS type environment. And that's happening, and there's some parallels between that work and moving from on-prem. And then, ultimately that SaaS environment is where you get the power of, elasticity and all of that kind of real value with the cloud environment. And as Andy just said, is Anthology's looked at it, and now they have the product. They've had a chance to really dig into it, and they see the value of making that part of a Lucian Student. And it has a very robust API infrastructure with Anthology Students, so that integration is going to be easier than I think they originally anticipated. And so I don't think it's going to be 5 years away. I think they are actively working on a plan to do that. So you're talking probably a year or two before you begin to see that as an option.
Yeah.
And so those that are looking for renewals, those looking to do renewals in the next couple of years, we'll probably hear from Anthology, we'd like you to consider going to a Lucian student. And if you were already in the Cloud 2 environment or the SaaS environment, it's going to be much easier for you. Your data's already there, and you've already done a lot of the heavy lifting.
No, that's right. It's good. It's a good place to be, and picking your timing. And I don't think there's going to be pressure for you to move. It's just you're going to see new opportunities, new features. It's where the enhancements are going to lie, and that'll be a business decision as folks go along. I think the other piece of update we have heard, though, before we dig in at this point, and again, this is recorded on June 1st, is that there have been significant reductions in the professional services staff at Lucian. So the people who were principally there to do implementations and support the stabilization activities, and then on into optimization sometimes to continue to provide some professional services. Those staffs had some significant layoffs. I think those that are in implementation, there's plenty of resources. I think they kept the people there, but they definitely winnowed the herd a bit there, which, as we talk a little bit here about moving forward from on-prem, how you fill the gaps of those people who would have otherwise helped you, I think is something we have to talk about. So why don't we turn, Greg, let's talk about the next steps, or the first steps. So here's a scenario. You're a generic on-prem customer. You've been there a while. You've been thinking about maybe going to the cloud, but you've got locally hosted software, direct SQL access, things like that. What is the first step if you make and we'll just assume we've made the business decision that we want to stay with Anthology, we want to look to that future potentially with a Lucian student, but we want to take what we got, and rather than go shop around and find something brand new, we want to move up into that cloud hosted, SaaS environment. Let's just assume they've made that decision. What are the kind of big steps? And then we can dig into the individual pieces.
So when I was there, what we laid out was they have kind of we'll call it a staging environment, but staging might be a misnomer because you could be there for a couple of years. So it's a lift and shift. Take what you have in place on-prem, move that into the cloud. We were referring to it as Cloud 2. Anthology, we tried to avoid that terminology with the customers, but to a cloud environment, lift and shift. The clock starts ticking on direct SQL access, read write. You used to have a year to continue to do that, and to give you a year to begin to use the APIs and change the way you access the data and things like that. And then that environment continues to have the thick client, so you can then begin the process of migrating to the web client. Once you are done the lift and shift, you've stabilized your environment, you've migrated as is, then you begin a phase 2, which would be the cloud adoption. And that's where you make that shift from thick client to web client, and we can come back to that briefly. The reporting on the thick client is Crystal reports. You make the switch to SSRS reports, and again, through partners such as Higher Ed BPO and Deerbrook, they can help facilitate both of those things. There's some challenges to make that migration where you need a partner. I wouldn't recommend you try that on your own right off the bat. They can train you or train the trainer to make that, especially around the web client. Moving to the web client, the security model is very different. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Andy. That could be, you've got experience in the challenges there on that one.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I think that is an area where we find that the good news in the design that Anthology put into place is to provide a very granular, highly controllable security environment. But like anything else, it's like going to an ice cream store and there's so many flavors of ice cream, you're not sure what to pick anymore. What happened to the good old days of chocolate and vanilla. But no, there's many flavors. And I think that security console is one that can be very difficult to manage or to understand. So moving through it in a way and working with people who are familiar with it, so you can both, if you need to do some things that are very granular, achieve them, but also if you're able to, or if you want to keep it simple, to know how to do that and strike the balance between limiting access and having too much or too little in that. It definitely is. Requires some previous knowledge, and it's hard. It would be hard to take on yourself without some kind of consulting resource to get that just right. That's been my experience.
Very much so. And the crystal reports to SSRS, higher ed BPO has been doing that for years now for customers that have made the migration. They have some folks and same with Deerbrook, have some folks with the functional knowledge that can help glean the requirements from the crystal report in order for the SSRS report writers to do that quickly. The next one would be the integrations and customizations. Again, the lift and shift, you kind of keep those in place, but ultimately, you're going to lose direct access to the database to read write, so you need to convert to the API structure. And again, a lot of schools have done that already, so you can get assistance from these folks as well. It's not until you move from the lift and shift, that staging environment, to the SaaS environment. It's a different database structure, so there is a data migration component. And then obviously, because the web client looks different than the desktop client, change management for your administrative staff is very important. In some cases, things are streamlined. Some cases might be a different menu pathway between thick client and web client. And that run book or that playbook for your administration staff, it's important that you work with somebody to develop that. You don't want to make the flip. And you can do it by department by department, which is what I've done in the past, is don't switch everybody at once. It's not like you're going to turn one off and turn one on. You start to make the migration. Maybe you do the registrar's office first, financial aid last, things like that. And again, once you've made that shift to the web client, there is additional functionality that you didn't have using the thick client or on-prem. So, the schools that, made this migration years ago did it to chase new functionality. And similarly so, what we just talked about before is once you get to that cloud to that SaaS environment and then the migration path to a Lucian student, I would imagine that a lot of the AI capabilities are going to be really driven from a Lucian student. So there'll be incentive to complete that migration to a Lucian student once it's ready. So it's step one, get from on-prem to the staging environment, make the cloud conversion, and then while you're in that SaaS environment, optimize, transform, and innovate. And again, this is where a partner can come in. Is if you're not doing financial aid automation, I was talking to someone the other day that it takes them 12 days to process financial aid. We'll go ahead and implement some of the workflows and automations and optimize. This is the value of making that move. And Andy, I think you guys have done this for a couple schools as well, right?
No, absolutely, and I think that is the trick here. As I said, if you're on-prem and you're looking to make a change, while the web client is different than the thick client, the desktop client, it's not alien. So you're not learning a new system. You're not making a lot of changes. A lot of the underlying processes that change. So it's incremental to your team. So the shock and awe of going to a brand new system isn't the same level. But there are a number of things that you can do. Some things do work a little differently, so there is some change management with people. But most importantly is there's all kinds of opportunity for automation and using the Power Platform and forms to gather data and start streamlining things you really didn't have the same levels of opportunity for. You're making I think a decision in that case, and this would be true of whatever, even if you went to some other platform. People need to understand how to use the tools. It's a little like reporting too, right? Well, my team knows how to make crystal reports, but they're not as skilled in SSRS or some Power BI to create dashboards. You may need to either retool your people, add new skills, or find a transitional approach with a partner who can do some of that, do some knowledge transfer, left seat, right seat ride until your people can upskill or change skill. on what you're doing. And it's similar with the business processes, right? You get in the new system and where are all these capabilities? The way Anthology generally is architected, the Anthology student product is, it's exceptionally flexible. If you can imagine it, you can probably do Power Automate to make it. And so when your people get in using the Power Platform and all that tooling that Microsoft has, which is, again, it's pretty accessible by people that you may already have, but they may not be as familiar with it. They can create workflows and they can create dashboards and processes to automate inside of it. And that was how Anthology generally approached it, right? Rather than build it all and say, you have to do it this way because this is how we built the process. It's flexible enough to allow you to engage with it and make the processes you want. And again, if you think about the future, if you're thinking about that transition, it's not a bad lift, knowing that a Lucian student's going to rely upon that for a long time. A Lucian student, if you hadn't caught some of the other podcasts or some of their outreach, it's not a different product. It's a way of reaching into your existing product and bringing data up and showing it. But what that will mean for whether you're a Banner cloud or a colleague cloud or your Anthology student, not all of those things that you're going to do are immediately going to be there. Maybe years, you may be sort of seeing two different interfaces. So the opportunities for you to build workflow automations, and that's what we do to help folks build those workflow automations, use Power BI, use the API hooks like OData to do different things with your integrations, are all still going to be there for a long time. So it's not a wasted effort. And I think a Lucian would tell you, if you're going to move, they're agnostic on where you move. So the one that's most familiar with you, which could be Anthology, is a good choice. So we do help people with that, Greg, and that's a good call out. Tell me a little bit about the lift and ship. Let's go through that. That's a process that you've seen done through partnership with Higher Ed BPO. Like, what would the experience be for a customer who's going through that? Like, what do they expect? What would their teams feel? How would it work in terms of student services and the like? What do they sense from they do that?
Yeah, and the best case scenario, that's like a 3 to 4 month process. I think that the biggest challenge for the on-prem customers is the inventory process. A lot of folks don't necessarily have inventoried and documented all of their integrations, all of their reporting, and everything that has to be moved. So, you really need to do a full environment assessment and put it to paper so you don't miss something when you go live in the cloud and test it. You need to inventory all of your SQL jobs and your batch processes, because those all, the batch processes have to be rescheduled in the cloud. You want to make sure you're reviewing your data, potentially a little bit of data cleanup before you make the migration. Anthology or Lucy in this case has to provision the environment, so they need to understand the workloads that you have in your current environment, so they provision it correctly, so you don't go to the cloud and find you have under capacity, which would be a bad thing. Reestablish cloud endpoints. They need to work with third-party vendors. Lucy needs the IP addresses to allow that from a security perspective. So again, it goes back to that inventory everything.
When you inventory, Greg, I don't mean to cut you off, but it's really, we always, when we talk with people in similar processes, it's a great opportunity to rationalize with your teams. What are you really using, right? Because you don't want to recreate things that people haven't been using for years, right? Or they, that awareness, usually these things accrete, right? Things stop being used, or there's SQL jobs running that have no real utility anymore, but people don't ever go back and turn them off. They just add new. So it is a good opportunity, I think, to do some house cleaning for people.
Yeah, I've seen it where somebody will have 600 Crystal reports, automatically generating reports, and don't have owners for 500 of them. And really, when you looked at actually access of those reports, it was only about 100. So it made their conversion much easier when they whittled down that inventory.
And that's an important point, I think, as a leader, right? When you're getting ready to do that, you can say, all right, what does everybody need? And people are like, I need everything. And when you start hearing those sorts of things, I think you really got to pull the string like, well, let's dig into that a little bit more. Because as you said, it makes your life so much easier. And it's going to make it easier, cheaper for the conversion. So you're not creating reports you don't need, or you find, like you said, that people are like, well, I don't really use that report because it didn't do what I needed. I'm like, well, I
You
just
generate
made
that
it.
access report. Yeah, you need a report on access first, right? How many people
Yeah,
access this report?
yeah, it's a good
You
point.
know, the security, the single sign-on established in that and access controls is going to be a little bit different than in the cloud, than on-prem. And then scheduling around your academic calendar, right? You don't want to do this in September, when your semester starts. So setting your schedule and cut over, and then you probably want some level of hypercare support from your support vendor for at least 4 to 8 weeks after going live in this environment.
Yeah.
I've done it as quick as 4 months, 3-4 months, that lift and shift. But again, that's not rewriting your reports. That's not getting rid of your SQL jobs. That's the phase 2. That's the cloud adoption. This is just a lift and shift. And so, if you go through each phase 2 could be, depending on what your inventory shows, could be a year.
Right. All the more reason to be real clear about, what is it that we really need and what integrations. I think there's opportunities there. I did want to ask you about scheduling though, because that's usually the truth that people like. I get asked like, what's the best time? It's like, well, what's the least worst time to do anything when it comes to student information system? But with respect to that inventory, right? Do you see, Greg? Because it would strike me like if I were doing it cold, I would ask myself, hey, I got all these integrations, and I know I'm going to go to the SaaS product. I'm going to have to re-engineer them. Is it a good time for people to say, I really don't need this thing to be fully integrated? I can live with, say, a manual batch process, a pass and a file for a short time. I wouldn't want to do that in a forever state, but I also don't need to engineer something that I'm not really going to want to keep going into the future.
Well, it's one of the, if I put my BA hat on, right? I ask somebody, how frequently does this data need to exchange? And they say, I need it near real time. Well, the source system, the data is 24 hours old. And so you're like, okay, why do you need to exchange information with this third-party vendor when their data is 24 hours old? Right. So I think part of your inventory is to really get at that as well. What is the frequency? And then it goes to the batch question. Is if you're doing a direct SQL statement, maybe you can do some kind of batch job to make it easier for you. And then, part of the cloud adoption, go to APIs. But I think that inventory should include the frequency and the age of the data and what do you really need. Because again,
it's a good time to revisit the logic of it, because I think people put it in place, and maybe there was a good reason in the past that make it near synchronous, say.
Yeah.
And then maybe that doesn't exist anymore because you've changed how you use other systems, or you went to, say, a new LMS, and the way it works, you don't need it in the way it was originally designed. So it's not really tech debt, but it is like the thinking. It's a good chance to revisit it, because I also think, again, it's a good chance because you're going to be called upon for the real integration and the business process changes that come with it. And so understanding richly why it was in a certain state is good prep for that day.
Exactly. And then the third phase we talked about earlier was the optimization. That's continual. So I think if you were roughly say it takes a year to do phase 1 and phase 2, I think the optimization, get the most out of your platform, depending if you want to optimize registration or optimize, the degree of progress audit or optimize financial aid, some of those things can take quite a few months to implement because you really need to lay out your business rules. If you don't have a good course catalog, right, degree progress audit can be challenging. If you don't have defined rules on your course pathway, to do registration automation can be complicated. right? So I think people discover the challenges they have or the deficiencies they have when you go to try to automate it. And that's true with any kind of automation or that you might want to put in place. Is you may not have the core baseline documentation in place that you're going to need to go build.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That particularly around those things, that's not an anthology problem. That would be anywhere, any system you go to. When you look to do automation, all those things come to play. Though I would say one of the things I've seen, Greg, is that particularly like you think about degree progress audits or student billing or anything, course catalogs you mentioned, that's just a particular favorite of mine. The all of those in an integrated system, right? It does change a little bit how some people may have done their work in the past, because what the registrar feels like they ought to do cascades because everything's connected like a ball of spaghetti. Next thing you know, it's affecting financial aid workflows or it's affecting student billing. And so the one change that we see people having to get crisper on is the kind of almost change management. And by that, I mean like IT change management of the business processes, so that those teams come together and understand how each of them work and how each of them affect each other. It's particularly it can be hard on people who aren't used to working that closely and view themselves in silos to stay aligned that way without.
Yeah, post we established a change management board that was made up of representatives across all of the departments. It was facilitated by IT, but we didn't own it. And to your point is, if somebody wants to make add a new program, it touches on everybody. And so that's the board that would make those decisions and empower the administration to do configuration changes in the system. And it wasn't always IT. I'm a big fan of empowering the staff to own the configuration of the system with appropriate change management.
It is. It's a change for some people, right? Particularly in places that use SQL, right? You could write code to get what you want, and you can have a fair amount of autonomy. But when the integrated SaaS system, you don't have that flexibility. So when people start making configuration changes, they can have some unfortunate, shocking impacts on their friends and family and the rest of the business. That is a big change, and people, I think, have to be. I wouldn't say led through it, but it is. You don't want to learn the hard way on that one. There's again, I think the value of partners is to help get you through that without stumping your toe on the way. Because those
there's a huge value. There's huge value in doing that. Is the administrative toil can be reduced greatly when you begin to leverage the system and the automations. But again, it requires some discipline on knowing the life cycle of the student throughout the system and the impact of one change over here is going to make over there, right? But I mean, again, at Post, we had a large call center and we saved 900 hours a day, administrative hours through automation. Well, 900 hours adds up to a lot in a year, but it took what we just described is that governance and that change management and discipline to be able to take advantage of that. And with AI, now you're on steroids, right? It's going to be even worse. So,
or better.
This is why you pick this system, right? This is where you really begin to get the value out of the solution.
And that's why we kind of started on this discussion too. I think the good news about somebody who's on-prem, right? Whether you looked at another system or this one, the path here is, I'd say, somewhat easier than a new system conversion because it's more familiar. So that kind of lift and ship to get you up at least into the cloud, so you're staged and prepped to make that cloud transition is it's a lot easier on people. But the opportunities for automation, for streamlining your business, to leverage AI, even in putting aside Ellucian students. New emphasis on it, using the native AI integrations that are built into the Anthology SaaS platform give you fantastic opportunities. And that's in addition to using the Power Platform that underlies it. which is all there at your disposal, so that you can get the money back, right? Get your return on investment over through automation and better student services, potentially any number of metrics and gateways there. Let's go back real quick, Greg. Just I know we're coming probably up on time and people's attention span, but let's talk about timing. So you're an on-prem customer, and you've now identified the kind of lift and shift, and then the conversion readiness, and then moving and optimizing in the SaaS platform. When would you want to go live? What do you see people looking at for go lives on any of those stages? Because they're kind of the same discussion, right? When you want to be in one or the other, right? Moving people, changing it.
Yeah, I mean, I think realistically, you're looking at summer months, July, early August to go live with the lift and shift approach. There's no reason you can't begin doing the inventory, months and months ahead. But from the kickoff of the project to going live, generally 3 months. And so if you're disciplined and can do the inventory fairly quickly, you start a May time frame with a July go live. And it really is, some of the dependency will be on the availability of Ellucian's cloud services, the Anthology cloud services team, to schedule that they have to build the environment and configure that. So they're going to need some upfront timeline and need to support you on that. A partner can't configure their environment. They have to configure their environment. So I think from your end, it's probably 3 months worth of work, assuming all the schedules align.
Yeah, and the schedules. We find people look at those times. There's an idea. There's a logic, and I think there's always pluses and minuses, right? Like I'll cut over summer looks good. You have to worry about summer registrations, right? Changing systems, what the impact is potentially on students, financial aid awarding. Again, there are advantages to doing it then because there are fewer people in the system. Maybe it's easier. I've seen people talk about end of semester cutovers, right? At the over Christmas time can be done, but for the same logic, if you're depending on what other licensing considerations you have. And then the one that I see also is kind of in that little window between add drop and financial aid disbursements being complete and registration beginning for the next semester. That little window in there where you really haven't, or you can delay taking registrations, but you've also cleared the students by and large from interacting with the SIS because they've had their financial aid awards, their bills are mostly cleaned up, and they've add drop has passed, census date has passed, so you're in that kind of that lacuna, if you were to use that term, where people aren't in there. But again, that's a very narrow window, and you got to be ready to go on the back end.
Yeah, and you have to coordinate with your third-party vendors to repoint, right? Or if they have an FTP site that you need to grab a file from a third-party integration, all that needs to be coordinated, and permissions need to be set. And you can build out the environment and do it, load the database once, but when you make the final cutover, you're stopping access to your existing on-prem system, restoring the database in the cloud, which can take, depending on the size of your database, could take 24 hours, right? So you could be hard down for 24 hours because you don't want to continue to write data into the old system. So you got the two components. The challenge with, over the holidays is your vendors may not be, other vendors may not be accessible to support you during that time frame.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that was anybody's favorite, but sometimes it's if you're looking for that disruption, who wants to work over those holidays? Nobody, particularly your staff, right? Because they've got to come in.
I've been in IT for quite a few years, so I've had very few holidays.
IT's used to working then, so there's no doubt about that. They don't like it any better than anybody else, though. It's part of the trade. So let's just recap real quick, Greg, the three steps. So lift and shift, take your existing system, put it up in a hosted environment.
Yep. Cloud adoption.
Then cloud adoption. So what is, again, just to recap, what are the essential activities going on in that
That's where you
period?
do your crystal report conversions. That's where you do your SQL, change your SQL statements to do API access to database. So all your integrations. So legacy SQL jobs, SSRS reports or crystal reports, cloud-based monitoring and alerting need to go in place. I'm sure you had a lot of alerting on-prem. So working with Anthology on the alerting piece and what does that process flow look like? API development, backups and restores, make sure you have that all documented with Anthology and you understand the process. Identity management, some of that falls into place as well. Again, continue to stabilize and performance because you're making the SaaS conversions, you got some performance fine tuning and then additional training of your staff to go onto the web client. So those are the, it's a reasonable list.
No, it's not light lift, but generally not too disruptive, right? In that second phase. It's the third one that's basically not a lift and shift. You're going to do a data migration and you're going to do some adoption to new systems. So that one feels like feels like an implementation, right?
And between the Anthology Cloud, Deerbrook, and Higher Ed BPO, I think collectively these teams have probably done several dozen. The personnel, some of them the personnel may have been over in Anthology. They're either at Deerbrook or Higher Ed BPO, but they've done this 3 dozen times, if not more. So this is not like a bunch of people that have no experience in doing these conversions, these migrations.
And that's right. So no one should feel alone. I think understanding the process, having people who can help you see, here are the pinch points, here are the things you need to watch for, here's some, not just the list of things to do, but the things that you want to focus on to be successful. Those are all super helpful in navigating that change. And like I said, the change in this case, the juice can very much be worth that squeeze because, well, one, you can't stay on-prem forever anyway, and the cost of VMware and all the rest is hard, and managing infrastructure is hard, and securing infrastructure is hard. Much better, generally speaking, in the cloud. But you can get there and get the automation and start seeing some of the efficiencies.
And that's phase 3. That's your phase 3, which is the optimization. And that's where, if you haven't really gotten seeing the value out of the product that you were hoping, that's where you really can focus on that.
That's right. You sure can. But it requires some active engagement on that. But we'll talk in maybe another podcast about, where those opportunities are, what that feels like to get there. But Greg, any closing thoughts here as we wrap up this talk about, getting from on-prem up into Anthology students SaaS product?
Well, I think it's just it's a mental game for yourself and your staff. You'd have to make the decision to pull off the Band-Aid. You feel initially like you're losing control. You're not losing control. It's just a different environment. I think you are future-proofing your investment. And I think if you think of it that way, and like I said, I'm very pleased that Ellucian has given you the opportunity to future-proof your investment. And so I understand that, the idea of keeping it all on-prem on your own hardware, a lot of security risks in this day and age by having your own on-prem environment. And so I think you just got to rip off the Band-Aid and realize the value here.
That's right. And one that's familiar, right? A product that's familiar, even if it's a little different. Easy data migration from that's well understood. There's a lot of advantages looking to go from Anthology on-prem to the Anthology SaaS, and like I said, now there's a future. There is a future in that product, and that's not half bad. So plenty of opportunities to optimize along the way. So, Greg, appreciate your time today. Thanks to those of you tuned in and listened in to the Moving Forward podcast. from Deerbrook. Hope everybody has a great day, and thanks again for listening.